do want to move on to another issue that some of you have raised in these questions and that bears on the last piece, which is this issue of drugs, alcohol, mental illness, and the role it plays both in causing homelessness, in exacerbating homelessness, and as kind of a barrier to solving homelessness. One thing that I think is helpful to keep in mind, and it's a metaphor, and like all metaphors, it doesn't prove anything, but I think it helps us understand. The co-author, who's a professor at the University of Washington, of a book called Homelessness is a Housing Problem, puts it like this, and this is the way to understand the research that's come out in recent years. Imagine that there are the children's game of musical chairs, and you have 11 people, and you have 11 chairs, and the music stops, everyone sits down, everyone has a seat. Music starts again, take away a chair, somebody is not going to have a seat at the end. That person is probably the person that has a limp, or that person is somebody that wasn't paying close attention, or that person just happened to be unlucky. But there's not enough chairs, so we say, well, the reason you don't have a chair is because you have a limp, or you weren't paying attention, or you're unlucky. But the actual reason why they don't have a chair is because there's only 10 chairs. So that's a metaphor. What's the facts behind it? Houston has people with mental illness and drug and alcohol addiction, but they have a much lower level of street homelessness and have made much greater progress on reducing the level of street homelessness that they have. New York has people who are drug addicted and mentally ill, but they house 94% of the people that do not have a permanent address in shelters. Detroit and Newark have much higher levels of poverty and also have drug and alcohol addiction and mental illness, but they're dramatically lower levels of street homelessness in cities like Detroit and Newark, not just in the winter, but all year round. So, yes, the people most likely to end up on the street and the people we're most likely to see and the people who are most likely to be disturbing are people who have drug and alcohol addiction and who are shooting up on the street or who are raving at the wind. Those are the people we see, those are the people we remember, those are the people that become a mental picture to us of the unhoused. But the reason they're out on the street and not in a shelter like in New York or an apartment like in Houston is because we do not have enough chairs. But that does not mean that it's easy then to get people back into housing with these issues. So let's talk realistically and candidly about the challenges of getting people housed, keeping people housed. It's hard for billionaire kids to kick drug habits. Much harder perhaps for some of the folks who have had trauma and who are out on the streets. What's the realistic challenge of actually dealing with the reality of drug and alcohol addiction and mental illness among the population who are unhoused?
Starting with addiction, addiction is a result of trauma. It's not a moral judgment against somebody. We also know that more people become addicted after becoming homeless than before. People use it because they don't have access to prescription medication. They also will use drugs to just deaden the pain and the fear and the terror of living on the streets. This is really true with women who live on the streets, who will often take drugs to stay awake at night because they're afraid of being attacked and raped. And then to try to sleep during the day, they'll take something else to try to sleep. So addiction is something that generally more often happens after homelessness than before. So it's not really a cause, it's a symptom. But it is extraordinarily difficult to deal with addiction. How many people heard about Matthew Perry's death recently from friends? And here was somebody who had millions of dollars, had family, had friends, and still struggled for decades with addiction. It is an excruciating It's not a moral defect to work with. What we do know, however, and the studies have shown this, in a recent study done out of UCLA, has shown that the most effective thing to do that deals with people who have addiction issues who are living on the streets is permanent housing. Not treatment centers. Not saying that treatment centers aren't good, but you can't stick someone in the treatment center and then have them come out and they're homeless and expect that they're gonna stay off drugs. So what the study has shown is if you can get people permanently housed and stable and then provide them with treatment, drug treatment, other support, that is the most successful way to deal with addiction. People need that stability. Now, what about mental health issues? Again, the perception is that everybody out there, a huge percentage of people have mental illness living on the streets. The fact of the matter is 100% of people living on the streets have some form of mental illness because living on the streets is terrifying. And that is going to affect your mental health just like it affects your physical health. How many have truly severe mental health issues, i.e. something like schizophrenia? It's a much smaller percent. But what we do know is that trauma of fear, living in constant flight or fight mode, which is what happens when you're on the street, your fear for your life at every moment, causes such severe trauma that mimics severe mental illness. So the majority of people out there, once they're stabilized and receiving support, those symptoms die down and they do perfectly well in housing, again with supports. There are way more people living in your street, in your families, colleagues, and friends that have mental illness than there are in the streets. But because they're stable, because they have medication, the care of doctors, they do well. There are, again, a small number of people that need more elevated care. I had a family member with severe schizophrenia, so I know how difficult that is. That is a need, but most people dealing with trauma, again, stability with supportive services is incredibly effective for most people. Now, there are people that move into housing that, yes, it's difficult. You know, it's that old 80-20, it's more, we were talking earlier, it's probably more like a 95-5 or even more percentage of people who do struggle in housing and they need greater support. But most of the people that we house do just fine once they are stable. Stabilization and housing reduces all of those symptoms.
Lieutenant, we've placed law enforcement in an almost no-win situation because our society has a high level of tolerance of drugs, except we don't like to see it out on the street. We don't like to see, no one wants their children to see someone shooting up on the street. And for many years, it was illegal to deal drugs out on the street. And so we asked law enforcement to go out and fix this problem. That has been incredibly challenging. What's the role of addiction and drug and alcohol addiction? And what role does that being against the law place the police department in trying to respond to a community that says, you've got to clean this up? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, rock, hard place. It's absolutely one of the most difficult things that we're dealing with at this point. I mean, I come from a generation of people where it was not appropriate for anybody to be using drugs, and now we've got these entire generations of kids who are, you know, basically, you know, around parents and other role models who are, you know, buying their weed now down at the weed store, and it's really changed this, you know, this attitude in general about drugs. But we are all still offended by watching people use them out in the open. So those of us who have housing and you know, enjoy a joint to start the day, don't have any issues related to drug use, and probably don't even put, you know, I'm not actually including myself in this, but don't put ourselves in that category of drug users, right? The drug users are the ones, are the homeless people in the park who are, you know, leaving their needles for, you know, children to find. And it's created this very strange dynamic of wanting those those people, the police to crack down on that. But let's just turn a blind eye to, the folks who are smoking weed and then going and driving their car. That's not offensive, and that shouldn't be illegal, but, this other thing should. I think that the pendulum is swinging a little bit. We went to a point where it looked like, we were probably gonna get mushrooms legalized in California, and luckily, Oregon tried it first, so things are swinging back a little bit this way as it's turning into a huge nightmare. I don't really, it's gonna be really hard to say next year even, what law enforcement's role is gonna be when it comes to personal, possession of a small amount of drugs, using it, for personal use, that kind of thing. It's really difficult to say, but it does put us in a very strange position. I will say that I didn't understand addiction. I mean, I actually have family members who have struggled with addiction, so I had some understanding of it, but it wasn't until fentanyl that I really truly understood how little control drug users have over their habit. In most police departments, we have a life-saving medal where if our officers go in and they save a person's life, then we acknowledge that and we present them with a medal. So it's a huge thing to get a life-saving medal. In the last year, we've reversed so many fentanyl overdoses with Narcan that we've actually not made, that's not even eligible for a life-saving medal for us anymore. You need a certificate. I mean, it is almost like a joke. I mean, especially when you sit there and you watch people that are so addicted that they will literally roll the dice with their own lives in order to be able to, take away whatever pain they're experiencing, not knowing if this one thing is gonna be the thing that's gonna make them stop breathing, and just literally take their chances that one, it doesn't have fentanyl in it, but if it does, that somebody's gonna be around to, shove this thing up their nose and literally bring them back from the dead. It's an incredibly, it's a shocking thing to watch, especially when you're the one who's doing it. So I don't know. I mean, it is a position we don't like to be in. I mean, we like bright line rules in the police world. We like to know what's right and what's wrong, and what we're going to take people to jail for and what we're not. And drugs has become this very, very murky issue for us.